What's up, everyone? Welcome to the bonus video for day 22. I hope you're enjoying the pilgrimage through the Litany of Humility. And as promised, this is the bonus material. So, we're talking about defense mechanisms, right? And defense mechanisms, they're an aspect of your internal family system designed to ward off anxiety and fear of being abandoned by the people you love. So, they basically emerge when a part of yourself enters into fight, flight, or freeze mode and starts acting to protect you from some at least perceived danger, but often very real emotional danger. So, I'll go through a number of the defense mechanisms to help you develop a sense of awareness around some of the most frequent patterns in your life so that you can begin the process of discovering the origin of the defense and finding healing through God's grace and accompaniment with others. I totally recommend that you really examine your inner world and get to know and understand your defense mechanisms in relationship with another person, with a guide, someone who can help you look at these defense mechanisms, understand them, and examine them given your past in a way that is healthy. So we're going to look at primary and secondary defenses. So primary defenses are things like extreme withdrawal. So you really withdraw emotionally and almost psychologically from an experience entirely. So stress can produce tiredness, can produce narcolepsy sometimes, where you can have such an intense and extreme withdrawal that you fall asleep. The more mild version of this is when you get really stressed, you just start yawning. You get really tired. This can be a defense mechanism. Another one is denial. If I don't acknowledge something, then it didn't happen. Then there's omnipotent control, which is external experiences determined by an internal choice or thought or experience. This idea of my own mind and my own internal system can actually influence the world outside of me to have the outcomes that I desire. Then there's idealization versus devaluation. It's the process of making someone out to be more than they are and or way worse than they are. So it's either this person is really terrible, no good and rotten, trying to protect yourself, or you idealize them. You just build them up and think that they're the greatest person ever, that they're going to solve all the problems and they're going to do everything and all this stuff. Those are forms of defense mechanisms. Another one is projection, which is blaming the world for what's going on the inside within you, or blaming what's happening in the world on what's going on inside of you. Either way, you are projecting blame onto someone else. Identification, which is I try and become someone else. It's a defense mechanism of being really uncomfortable in your own shoes, or if the idea that if people really knew me, they wouldn't love me. So I identify as this other person. I identify as them because I know that they love them. Then there's splitting. Splitting is things are all good or all bad. There's no healthy. There's no gray area. It's just everything is either good or bad. Then there's acting out. This is often acting like the actor. It's pretending to be the person in front of you. It's a way to deflect and make sure that somebody doesn't access the real you. Next is sexualization, where we turn anxiety into sexual experiences. Let's say somebody really wants to control something and is in a state of being out of control. Well, a defense mechanism is you turn to something sexual that you can control, like watching porn or masturbating or things like that. It can be a defense mechanism. Then there is extreme disassociation, so becoming a separate self or separating the self from their parts. It's becoming someone else to separate, to create as much difference between you and your pain as possible. The most mild form of disassociation can be daydreaming. So you can pretend to be someone else, or you can create a fantasy world in your own mind to disassociate and to create distance between you and the pain. So those are primary defenses. Secondary defenses, things like regression. If there's no awareness that something is happening, then it's denial. But if there's a sense that we're intentionally burying an emotion, it's suppression, it's repression, it's It's literally having your anger simmering just below the surface and you not being aware of it, and you intentionally trying to keep that anger down and at bay. You're trying to repress it. Next is regression, which is returning to an earlier stage of development. So if you look at it, it's something like children who have a younger sibling regress in order to get attention. They start acting like babies in order to get attention. Or you can regress to being childlike when you are in need and you don't know how to get your need. You can see a lot of adults in life, I'm sure you know adults the same as I do, that throw temper tantrums. Well, they're regressing back to a younger age, a childlike age. Next is isolation of affect. So it's deciding not to become emotionally attached to a person or a moment. It's policing the emotion and cutting off a connection to the emotion that you have. It's not being able to process the emotion and have access to the emotion and operate from your emotional core in the moment. This is actually really useful for like a cop who can isolate their emotional experience when they're trying to solve a crime or protect someone or in the presence of some sort of evil. They can isolate that emotion and keep it over here, but they get into problems if they keep that emotion isolated. Same with us. Next is a big one. Lots of people have this one. It's called intellectualization. It's when you try and separate from the emotional life, where you step back and look at your feelings from really a purely heady perspective. You stop feeling your feelings and you think your feelings. You don't actually process through your feelings. You're not in the present moment. Intellectualization really hinders your ability to be empathetic. Next is rationalization, which is separating yourself from negative emotions. You can rationalize disappointment. I didn't want to get that house anyway, or I didn't want that toy anyway, or I didn't want to date that guy anyway. You sort of rationalize your way out of disappointment and out of feeling negative emotion. Next is moralization. This is spiritualizing psychology. This is perfectionism. I take on moral responsibility that isn't actually mine to take. So I take on the burden of somebody else's salvation or somebody else's well-being. I take on the burden of their inner life when it's not actually my responsibility, and my justification for it is some sort of moralization. Next is compartmentalization, which is separating two thoughts or holding two ideas together that are contradiction. It's the idea of like, I am an absolute rule follower, but I speed. So we'll compartmentalize in order to prevent ourselves from being aware of the contradictions between what we believe and how we're actually living. Next is undoing, which is the false belief that I have the power to affect the world around me without having to accept responsibility for anything. It's like the extreme version of this is the husband who has an affair, but thinks he can take care of it with some jewelry. So it's an undoing. It's like, yeah, well, I had the affair, but I made up for it by buying her jewelry. That's sort of this magical undoing thinking. And then the last one to go through is something called displacement. And this is a really common one too, which is you take your anger and you put it somewhere it's not supposed to be. I am really angry at my spouse. So when my dog comes in the house and pees in the house instead of peeing outside, I kick my dog, right? I displacing my anger toward my spouse, toward my dog. Another more common way of looking at it is watch men when they watch sports. Watch men watching sports, right? Their team loses and they punch a hole in a wall, or they scream and they curse and they yell, and they have way more emotion as it relates to the sporting event than they do, let's say, when their kid flunks out of school. It's displacement. It's taking anger that you don't know what to do with and that you don't know where to place it, but also not being able to hold on to that anger inside any longer. So you just take that anger and you put it over here. All right, now I went through that list pretty fast. I imagine you went through that list, you identified with a number of defenses that exist in your life. I know that I do when I listen to it. I'm like, yep, I do that one. Yep, I do that one. Yep, I do that one. Well, try and focus on one that seems most prevalent and disruptive in your life. And then take a moment and close your eyes and try and enter into a place of curiosity toward that defense and ask the part of you that's holding that defense what it's doing, what it's protecting you from, where it comes from. Ask it to remind you of the first time it had to emerge to protect you in that way, and then really spend some time learning from it. And when you're done, thank that part of you for all it's been doing to try and protect you. This can be a really powerful experience if you're able to do it. I highly recommend doing it with someone to walk alongside you. And if you want my support in that, if you want to take a deep dive into one of your defense mechanisms, I'd be happy to do it. Just email me at jack@thecatholicmentor.com. All right, everyone. God bless you. Hope you're having a great week.